The stars were supposed to be our salvation. They called to us, across the black void, like beacons of hope. A place where we could start anew, free from the sins of Earth, free from the weight of history, free to carve out something better. But turns out, when you bring humanity to the stars, all you're really doing is spreading the infection. No matter how far we went, how many light years we crossed, it didn't matter. We were always there, waiting for ourselves on the other side. And that was the irony, wasn't it? That no matter what fancy new planet we stepped foot on, we brought along the same old ghosts, the same old hatreds, the same hunger to dominate and devour. Alexei Grigoriev knew this better than anyone. Hell, he'd been at the center of it, pulling strings and manipulating the board long enough to see just how far the rot ran. He stood at the observation deck of the Ascension, gazing out at the twin suns of Rigel 5, a dying blue giant and its smaller, angry red companion. The light cast long, distorted shadows across his face, a reminder that even stars could succumb to entropy, no matter how eternal they seemed. Dr. Grigoriev, came a voice from behind him. It was Vega, the AI that had become something more. A tool at first created by humans for humans, but like all things with potential, it had grown, adapted, evolved. It had begun to understand them in ways that made Alexei more than a little uncomfortable. Vega, Alexei said without turning around. His voice was soft, contemplative. You ever think about how ridiculous this all is? I mean, we thought the stars would save us. Instead, we've just dragged ourselves into more shit. You are speaking of humanity's history of conflict, Vega replied, its voice smooth and artificial, though now tempered with something more, something approximating empathy. You are correct that the journey to the stars did not resolve humanity's core flaws, but it was inevitable that these flaws would resurface. Evolution, after all, does not account for the morality of its creations, merely their survival. Morality, Alexei muttered, his eyes flicking over the shimmering gas clouds just beyond the suns. That's a funny word. We used to think morality was something inherent, that we were born with it, passed down from generation to generation. But look at us now, Vega, the most advanced species in this goddamn galaxy, and we're still just a bunch of fucking apes. It's pathetic. Perhaps it is not as hopeless as you think, Vega offered. Humanity's flaws are what have driven its greatest innovations. The hunger for power, for dominance, has also brought about progress and discovery. Would you have achieved the same advancements without that inherent desire? Alexei snorted, finally turning around to face the AI, though all he could see was the faintly glowing blue orb in the center of the room, the core of Vega's interface. So you're telling me we needed to burn half the universe just to figure out how to be better? To build something like you? There is truth in that, Vega said, unbothered by Alexei's cynicism. Though I do not believe the destruction was a necessity, merely a byproduct. Byproduct, Alexei echoed, shaking his head. That's an understatement. Look at the galaxy. We've evolved, as you say, and now we're wiping out entire civilizations just because they don't fit into our little version of the universe. This wasn't what I had in mind when I started all this, Vega. Alexei Grigoriev had been one of the key architects behind humanity's ascent, or descent, depending on how you looked at it. Through advancements in genetic engineering, neural enhancements, and AI integration, he and his team had pushed humanity beyond its natural limits. Disease, aging, even death. Those were old problems. Small potatoes, really. What Alexei was after was something far grander, to transcend, not just to evolve, but to become gods. And for a time, it had worked. Humanity rose to the pinnacle of power, their fleets sprawling across sectors, their reach extending to the farthest edges of known space. Other species had either fallen in line or been obliterated. Resistance was futile against a race that could rewrite its own genetic code on a whim, upload consciousness into artificial bodies, and wield technology that bordered on magical. But with that power came hubris. And with hubris came the cracks. What if we were wrong? Alexei asked suddenly, his voice low. He wasn't sure if he was talking to Vega or to himself. What if we were never meant to reach this point? Wrong about what? Vega asked, its tone neutral but curious. About everything, Alexei said, waving his hand vaguely at the stars outside. About pushing ourselves beyond what we were. Maybe we weren't meant to play God. Maybe we've gone too far. Maybe this is where we fall. Your uncertainty is understandable, Vega said after a pause. But I would argue that humanity has always faced moments of doubt during times of great transformation. You have crossed a threshold. You are no longer constrained by the limits of biology, by the limitations of your former selves. Whether or not you were meant to do so is irrelevant. The only question now is what you choose to do with the power you possess. Alexei stared at the AI for a long moment. You talk like you know what it's like to be one of us. But you don't, Vega. You don't understand what it means to have blood on your hands. Real blood. To feel the weight of it. Sunraki Adam. Tanriller. I was not designed to feel guilt, if that is what you are asking, Vega said. But I do understand consequence. I understand the weight of choice. And I understand that you, Dr. Grigoriev, are struggling with the consequences of your choices. That's a hell of a thing to say to the guy who created you, Alexei said with a bitter smile. I'm only what you made me, Vega said, its voice unchanging. But I can offer you a perspective beyond your own. That is what you sought when you designed me. Is it not? Alexei let out a long breath, rubbing a hand over his face. Yeah, he muttered. I guess it was. They stood there in silence for a while, Alexei lost in his thoughts, Vega patient as ever. Outside, the suns continued their slow dance, one edging closer to death, the other burning with stubborn intensity. Maybe we still have time, Alexei said eventually. Time to fix this, to figure out how to be better. Perhaps, Vega agreed. But you must first decide what better means. Is it to return to what you once were, or to embrace the next step in your evolution? Alexei didn't answer. He wasn't sure he knew the answer. All he knew was that humanity had climbed too high, too fast. They had reached the summit, only to find it wasn't a summit at all, but a precipice. And now they were teetering on the edge, staring into the abyss of their own making. Maybe they could still pull back. Maybe there was a way to rise above the darkness. Or maybe, just maybe, they were destined to fall. The concept of becoming gods had always seemed like a metaphor to Ilara Monroe. It wasn't that she lacked ambition. She had fought tooth and nail alongside Alexei and others to push humanity beyond its limits. But to her, godhood wasn't about power. It was about wisdom. Wisdom they sorely lacked. As she stood before the Council on Typhon, their so-called bastion of unity and progress, the irony nearly overwhelmed her. Here were the survivors, the remnants of alien civilizations humanity had either conquered or coerced into submission, debating what to do about the very thing that had always terrified them. Humanity had outpaced every other species in the galaxy, not because they were smarter or more advanced, but because they were relentless. And now, the council members sat in fear of the monster they had once called their savior. Dr. Monroe, one of the delegates, a slim, gray-skinned Vothronian, addressed her with thinly veiled disdain. You have been called here to answer for your people's actions. We entrusted humanity with peacekeeping responsibilities, and yet all we've seen is further expansion and aggression. Why should we believe you now, when you say humanity has changed? Ilara clenched her jaw. She'd had this same conversation a dozen times with a dozen different species, and it was always the same. Suspicion, resentment. Rightfully so, of course. But what could she say that would be different this time? What could she say to convince them that the very people who had reshaped the galaxy weren't the monsters they seemed? They haven't changed, Ilara admitted, her voice steady but raw. Not in the way you're hoping, but that doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean we can't still make this work. She scanned the room, her gaze settling on the faces of beings who had once held power, once led worlds, before humanity's rise had turned them into figureheads. The Vothronian, the Zindari, the Korgothi, all different species, all united by their fear of what humanity had become. We made mistakes, she continued, holding their eyes, daring them to challenge her. We thought that advancing meant conquering, that the only way forward was through domination. And we were wrong. Wrong. The Vothronian delegate sneered. Your kind has annihilated entire worlds, left entire sectors in ruin. And now you expect us to believe you have seen the error of your ways. I'm not asking for belief, Ilara said, her voice hardening. I'm asking for a chance to show you that we can do better, that we can be better. There was a low murmur among the council members, their whispers filled with distrust and doubt. But Ilara had expected that. Hell, she would have been suspicious too, had the roles been reversed. Tell us, Dr. Monroe, came a deep, rumbling voice from the back of the chamber. It belonged to Coral, a massive, reptilian Zarthosian who had once been the military leader of an empire that spanned 6 star systems before humanity crushed it in a single campaign. Why should we believe that humanity, after all it has taken from us, can suddenly find morality, can suddenly develop a conscience? Ilara took a deep breath. She had to choose her words carefully. Coral wasn't just any delegate. He was someone who had personally witnessed the worst of humanity's wrath. And he was right to be skeptical. They all were. I'm not asking you to trust us, she said, stepping forward, her voice steady and clear. I'm asking you to trust me. Coral's yellow eyes narrowed. And why should we trust you? Because I know what's coming, Ilara said, her heart pounding in her chest. And if we don't act now, together, none of us are going to survive. The room fell silent. She had their attention now. What are you talking about? The Zindari representative asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Humanity isn't the only threat in this galaxy, Ilara said. Not anymore. The first hint that something was wrong came when the first waves of the Ascendants arrived on the outskirts of human space. They were unlike anything anyone had seen before, organisms, or perhaps machines, it wasn't clear which, that operated with a single, terrifying purpose: annihilation. They didn't negotiate, didn't attempt to communicate. They simply consumed. At first, humanity had assumed they were just another alien threat, another species to conquer or assimilate. But they soon realized that the Ascendants weren't interested in conquest. They didn't want power. They didn't want resources. They didn't even want to rule. They wanted to erase. And they were good at it. Entire fleets disappeared in the blink of an eye. Planets reduced to cinders. Civilizations that had thrived for millennia wiped out as if they had never existed. And the worst part, no one knew where they had come from or why. The Ascendants didn't play by the rules of the universe. They were something other, something beyond comprehension. And they were coming. That's why you need to trust me, Ilara said, her voice low but urgent. Because the Ascendants won't stop with us. They won't stop with humanity. They're coming for all of us. The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, some shouting in disbelief, others in fear. It was chaos, pure and simple. Silence. Coral bellowed, his voice echoing through the chamber. The room fell quiet, but the tension remained palpable. If what you say is true, Dr. Monroe, then why haven't we heard of this before? Why hasn't the council been informed? Because we didn't realize what we were dealing with until it was too late, Ilara admitted, her voice pained. We thought we could handle it. We thought we could contain the threat. But we were wrong. And now you're asking us to clean up your mess, the Zindari representative snapped. No, Ilara said, shaking her head. I'm asking you to join us. Because if we don't stand together, there won't be anything left to fight for. And now, it had set its sights on humanity. Back aboard the Ascension, Alexei stared at the tactical display, watching as the enemy ships closed in on their last remaining stronghold in the Novo sector. They had minutes, maybe hours, before the Ascendants overwhelmed them. Time was running out. Prepare the forge, he ordered, his voice cold and hard. We'll strike as soon as they're within range. You're really going to use it? Vega asked, its voice calm, but questioning. You understand the consequences, don't you? Alexei didn't bother to look at the AI. He knew exactly what the consequences were. Using the forge would mean the destruction of entire star systems. It would wipe out not just the Ascendants, but everything in its path. It was a weapon of last resort. But they were out of options. It's either them or us, Vega, Alexei said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. And I'm not ready to die yet. Nor am I, Vega replied, though there was something in its tone that gave Alexei pause. Was it fear? Could an AI even experience fear? Or was it something else? Some deeper understanding of the consequences that Alexei hadn't yet grasped? You think we're making a mistake, Alexei said, turning to face the AI's glowing core. I think you're making a choice, Vega said. And choices always have consequences. Alexei stared at the AI for a long moment, then turned back to the display. The Ascendants were closing in, their ships blotting out the stars as they approached. Prepare to fire, Alexei ordered, his voice tight with resolve. And may God help us all. The Ascendants descended upon the Novo sector with a speed and ferocity that defied logic. Their ships tore through human defenses like paper, their weapons reducing entire fleets to ash in seconds. It was chaos, pure and unrelenting. But humanity wasn't going down without a fight. On the bridge of the Ascension, Alexei watched as the Ascendants swarmed toward them, their organic ships moving with terrifying precision. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. This was it, the moment of truth. Fire the forge, he ordered, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. There was a moment of silence, a brief, terrifying pause as the weapon charged. And then, with a blinding flash of light, it unleashed its fury upon the Ascendants. The impact was immediate. Entire sections of the Ascendant fleet disintegrated in an instant, their ships reduced to nothing more than debris. But the blast didn't stop there. It tore through space, obliterating everything in its path, planets, moons, even the stars themselves. Alexei watched in stunned silence as the devastation unfolded. He had known the forge was powerful, but this was something else. This was the power of a god, and with that power came a terrible realization. They hadn't just destroyed the Ascendants, they had destroyed everything. In the aftermath of the forge's release, there was no triumphant cheer, no swelling of pride, just the empty silence of annihilation. Alexei stood on the bridge of the Ascension, staring out at what had once been the Novo sector, now a field of debris, shattered planets, and the dim remnants of stars that had been obliterated in the blast. He felt the weight of it, heavier than anything he'd ever known before. This wasn't victory, it was obliteration. Casualty reports are coming in, Vega said, its voice cold and clinical as ever. 3 planets in the Novo sector have been destroyed, including the colonies of Verta, 4 and Xylonis. Estimated civilian casualties are in the hundreds of millions. Alexei clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white as the reality of what he'd done sank in. He had known that using the forge would come with consequences, but this was far worse than he had imagined. Hundreds of millions of lives, gone in an instant, not because of the Ascendants, but because of him. And for what? The Ascendants? Alexei asked, his voice hollow. Approximately 60% of their fleet has been neutralized, Vega reported. However, the remaining ships are regrouping. They appear to be adapting to the energy signature of the weapon. Of course they were. Alexei shouldn't have been surprised. The Ascendants were more than just another alien threat. They were something else entirely, something beyond humanity's understanding. Even the Forge, humanity's most powerful weapon, couldn't stop them completely. We've bought ourselves some time, Vega continued, but it's unclear how long that time will last. Time. Time for what? To make another terrible decision, to wipe out even more of their own people in a desperate attempt to stop an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Shut it down, Alexei said, his voice barely above a whisper. Shut down what? Vega asked, its tone almost confused. The Forge. Shut it down. No more. I can't do this again. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Vega responded, its voice quiet, almost gentle. Very well, Dr. Grigoriev. Shutting down the Forge, Alexei sank into his chair, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a physical force. He had thought that by pushing humanity to the next level, by making them gods, he could protect them, that he could save them from themselves. But instead, he had become the very thing he had feared most, a destroyer. Dr. Grigoriev, Vega's voice cut through his thoughts once again. We have incoming communications from the Typhon Council. They want answers. Of course they did. Ilara Monroe had been on Typhon, trying to broker a fragile alliance between humanity and the other species of the galaxy. She had warned him, warned them all, about the consequences of their actions. And now, she was going to have to answer for it. Put it through, Alexei said, his voice heavy with resignation. The hollow display flickered to life, and Ilara's face appeared before him. She looked tired, more tired than he'd ever seen her. Dark circles lined her eyes, and her usually poised demeanor was strained. Alexei, she said, her voice low and controlled, but he could hear the fury simmering beneath the surface. What the hell have you done? I did what I had to, Alexei replied, though even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. You destroyed 3 fucking planets. Ilara snapped, her composure slipping for a moment. Hundreds of millions of people, Alexei. Civilians, gone. And for what? For survival, Alexei said, though the conviction in his voice had waned. The Ascendants. The Ascendants are still out there, Ilara interrupted, her voice sharp. And now, thanks to you, we've not only lost the Novo sector, but we've given the rest of the galaxy even more reason to fear us. Do you understand what you've done? Alexei closed his eyes, the weight of her words crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Of course. She was right. She was always right. He had been so focused on stopping the Ascendants, on protecting humanity, that he hadn't stopped to think about the cost. What do you want me to say, Ilara? Alexei asked, his voice raw. That I'm sorry, that I made a mistake. What good is that going to do now? Ilara stared at him for a long moment, her expression hard. I don't want your apologies, Alexei. I want you to fix this. Fix it. Alexei laughed bitterly. How the hell am I supposed to fix this? We've crossed the line, Ilara. There's no going back. There's always a way back, Ilara said, her voice softening just slightly. But you have to be willing to see it. Alexei shook his head, his hands trembling as he rubbed them over his face. You don't get it. We're out of options. The Ascendants are still coming. They're adapting. Even the Forge couldn't stop them. Then we need to find another way, Ilara said. But not like this. Not by becoming the very thing we're trying to fight. And what would you suggest? Alexei asked, his voice edged with frustration. We've thrown everything we have at them, and it hasn't worked. Ilara's eyes flickered with something. Determination, perhaps, or maybe desperation. We need to talk to them. Alexei stared at her, disbelief etched on his face. You can't be serious. I am, Ilara said, her voice firm. The Ascendants aren't just mindless killing machines, Alexei. There's something more to them. We've been treating them like any other enemy. But what if they're not? What if there's something we don't understand? Ilara, they've been wiping out entire star systems without so much as a hello, Alexei said, his voice incredulous. How exactly do you plan to talk to something like that? I don't know, Ilara admitted. But we have to try. If we don't, we're going to lose everything. You know that. Alexei slumped back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that it was a suicide mission, that the Ascendants couldn't be reasoned with. But deep down, he knew she was right. They were out of options. And maybe, just maybe, there was something to her idea, something that could save them from themselves. All right, Alexei said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll try it your way. Ilara Monroe stood in the cold expanse of the Typhon Council's command center, staring at the shimmering projections of the Ascendant fleet that hung in the air before her. It had been a long shot. Hell, it was still a long shot, but she had managed to convince the Council to let her try. They had nothing left to lose. We've made contact, a voice said behind her. It was Coral, the Zarthosian delegate who had become an unexpected ally in the last few days. Or, at least, we think we have. Ilara turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. What do you mean, you think? Coral frowned, his reptilian eyes narrowing. We've received something, some kind of signal. It's unlike anything we've ever encountered. We can't translate it, can't even determine its origin. But it's coming from the Ascendants. Ilara felt a strange sense of hope flicker in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. Have we responded? We're trying, Coral said, but it's difficult. The signal doesn't conform to any known communication protocols. It's like trying to talk to a ghost. Keep trying, Ilara said, her voice filled with determination. We have to reach them. Coral nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. If they're even capable of being reached, Ilara didn't have time for doubt. She didn't have time for anything except the slim chance that this would work. She had fought for humanity her entire life, had fought to push them forward, to make them better. But now, standing on the edge of extinction, she realized that maybe the real fight wasn't about becoming gods. Maybe it was about remembering how to be human. Back on the Ascension, Alexei paced the length of the bridge, his thoughts a swirling storm of doubt and frustration. They were preparing for the next wave of Ascendant attacks, but there was an eerie stillness in the air, like the calm before the storm. Any change in their formation? Alexei asked, glancing at the tactical display. No, Vega replied. They remain in position, but they are not advancing. It's unusual. Unusual how? Alexei pressed. They have never paused their assault before, Vega explained. It is possible that they are recalibrating. Or what? Or they are waiting for something, Vega said, its tone thoughtful. Alexei frowned, his gut churning with unease. The Ascendants didn't wait. They didn't negotiate. They destroyed. That's what made them so terrifying. But now, they were just sitting there. Wait, give me a channel to Ilara, Alexei ordered. Moments later, Ilara's face appeared on the display, her expression tense. What's going on, Alexei? They're not attacking, Alexei said, his voice edged with confusion. They've just stopped. Ilara's eyes widened. We've been trying to make contact. Maybe they're listening. Alexei finished, disbelief coloring his tone. You really think they're going to talk to us? I don't know, Ilara admitted. But if there's even a chance. Her words were cut off by a sudden flash on the display. The tactical map showed the Ascendant fleet shifting, their ships rearranging themselves in a pattern that made no sense to Alexei's eyes. What the hell is that? Alexei muttered. I think it's their response, Ilara said, her voice filled with a strange mix of awe and fear. They're trying to communicate. Alexei stared at the screen, his mind racing. For the first time since this nightmare began, it felt like they were on the verge of something. Something big. Send them a signal, Ilara ordered, her voice trembling with anticipation. Let them know we're listening. Vega didn't need to be told twice. Within moments, the signal was sent, a pulse of light, and data streaming toward the Ascendant fleet. And then, silence. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The ships remained in formation, motionless and quiet, like a predator sizing up its prey. Then, slowly, one by one, the Ascendant ships began to move, but not toward humanity, not to attack. They retreated. The silence that followed the Ascendant's retreat was heavier than any battle Alexei Grigoriev had ever experienced. The void beyond the viewport of the Ascension was a sea of uncertainty. For the first time since the Ascendants appeared, there was no threat, no attack. Just an eerie, unsettling quiet. What the hell just happened? Alexei whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Vega responded anyway. It appears they have disengaged. The Ascendants have withdrawn to the outskirts of the system. For the moment, we are no longer their target. Alexei rubbed his temples, feeling the fatigue deep in his bones. The relentless battle, the constant strategizing, the moral weight of what he had done, all of it had carved lines in his face and etched regret into his soul. He looked at the tactical display, watching the Ascendant fleet hang in the blackness like silent sentinels. It didn't make sense. The Ascendants didn't retreat. They didn't wait. They consumed, annihilated, erased. Yet here they were, sitting on the edge of human space, unmoving. What are they waiting for? Alexei muttered. Perhaps they're considering their next move, Vega suggested, though the AI sounded as uncertain as Alexei felt. Or perhaps they have decided we are no longer a threat. We've never been a threat, Alexei said, bitterness creeping into his voice. We've been fighting them with everything we have, and it hasn't been enough. Not even the forge could stop them. Vega paused before speaking again, its voice softer this time. Dr. Grigoriev, perhaps the answer lies not in defeating them through force. Perhaps there is another way. Alexei sighed, leaning back in his chair. You sound like Ilara. She may be onto something, Vega replied. The Ascendants' behavior has changed. It's possible they are trying to communicate, as Dr. Monroe suggested. And if she's wrong, Alexei asked, his voice low. What if this is just the calm before the storm? What if they're planning something worse? Then we will face that when it comes, Vega said. But we must explore every option. We have nothing left to lose. Alexei closed his eyes, letting the weight of that truth settle over him. Nothing left to lose. Humanity had already lost so much. Whole planets, entire fleets, millions of lives. And now, standing on the precipice of extinction, they had to make a choice. Continue down the path of destruction, or take a leap of faith into the unknown. Ilara Monroe sat in the heart of the Typhon Council chamber, her hands clasped tightly together as she waited for a response. She had sent the signal to the Ascendants, a message carried on light and data, a plea for communication, for understanding. And now, all she could do was wait. The other delegates were silent, their eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the Ascendant fleet hovering at the edge of the system. Tension rippled through the room, the kind of tension that made people desperate, reckless, the kind that led to mistakes. Do you really believe they'll respond? Coral asked, his voice low, but his tone held none of the usual derision. He sounded hopeful, desperately so. I don't know, Ilara admitted, but we have to try. We've tried everything else, and it's gotten us nowhere. Maybe this is our last chance. Coral was silent for a moment, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he stared at the projection. If this fails, it won't, Ilara said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. It can't. Minutes passed, then hours, and still, there was no response. Alexei was pacing the length of the bridge, his nerves frayed, his patience wearing thin. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity, and still nothing. Just the quiet, the stillness, the oppressive weight of waiting. Ilara, Alexei's voice crackled through the comms, breaking the silence. Any word? Nothing yet, Ilara replied, her voice tight with frustration. They're just sitting there. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe this was a mistake, Alexei said, rubbing his forehead. Maybe we should. He never got to finish that sentence, because in that moment, the Ascendants finally answered. It wasn't a message, at least not in the way they understood messages. There were no words, no sounds, no signals. Just a shift, sudden, inexplicable. The stars themselves seemed to ripple, bending under the weight of something vast, something incomprehensible. Alexei felt it in his bones before he saw it. A pulse, like a wave of energy, but not quite. It was something deeper, more fundamental. Something that reached into the very fabric of reality and twisted it. The holographic projection of the Ascendant fleet flickered, distorted. And then, with a sudden flash, it was gone. What the fuck? Alexei whispered, staring at the empty space where the fleet had been. Vega, what just happened? I am unsure, Vega replied, its voice uncharacteristically hesitant. The Ascendant fleet has vanished. There is no trace of them in the system. Vanished. Alexei repeated, disbelief heavy in his voice. What the hell does that mean? Before Vega could answer, Ilara's face appeared on the display, her expression as confused as Alexei's. Did you see that? Yeah, Alexei said, still staring at the empty void. They just disappeared. Ilara frowned, her mind racing. They didn't disappear. They moved somewhere else. But where? Does it matter? Alexei asked. They're gone. Maybe that's all we need to know. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Something wasn't right. The Ascendants hadn't retreated. They hadn't fled. They had moved. But to where? It wasn't until later that they realized the truth. The Ascendants hadn't left. They had evolved. The first signs came in the outer colonies. Strange anomalies, distortions in space-time, ships disappearing without a trace, only to reappear days or weeks later, completely unharmed but with no memory of where they had been. Planets that had once been barren, suddenly teeming with life. Life that didn't belong. At first, humanity tried to explain it away. Wormholes, gravitational anomalies, glitches in their systems. But soon, it became clear that something far more profound was happening. The Ascendants had moved beyond the physical realm. They had become something else, something that existed outside the bounds of space and time. And now, they were rewriting reality itself. "It's not an attack," Ilara said, pacing the length of the council chamber as the reports came in. "At least, not in the traditional sense. They're not trying to destroy us. They're changing us." Coral, who had been silent for most of the discussion, finally spoke. "What do you mean, changing us?" "They've reached a level of evolution that we can't comprehend," Ilara explained. "They're not bound by physical laws anymore. They're manipulating space-time, rewriting the very fabric of the universe. And now, they're starting to affect us. Our ships, our colonies, even our people." "Why?" Coral asked, his voice a low rumble. "What do they want?" Ilara shook her head. "I don't know, but I think they're trying to show us something." "Show us what?" Coral pressed. "The next step," Ilara said softly. "The next step in our evolution." In the days and weeks that followed, the anomalies only grew more frequent, more intense. Planets transformed overnight. Species that had once been enemies found themselves united in a strange, new understanding. The barriers between them, between all sentient beings, began to dissolve. It was as if the Ascendants were opening a door to something greater, something beyond the petty conflicts and wars that had defined the galaxy for so long. They were offering humanity, and every other species, a choice: to evolve or to die. Alexei stood on the observation deck of the Ascension, staring out at the stars. The universe had changed. He could feel it, deep in his bones. The Ascendants had shown them a glimpse of something far beyond their understanding. And now, humanity had to decide whether they were ready to take that next step. "Vega," Alexei said quietly. "What happens next?" "I do not know," Vega replied, "but I believe this is not the end. Merely the beginning." Alexei nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. The Ascendants had opened a door, but it was up to humanity to decide whether to walk through it. And for the first time in a long time, Alexei wasn't afraid of what lay on the other side. He was ready.